made for YouTube in actually quite a while. So, without much ado, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a writer and blogger. And to see my latest posts, go to my blog, Jgsf1987.com. You can also find me on both Facebook and Twitter, and a whole host of other social networking sites. Go into the About part of my channel, and you'll see exactly that. Anyhow, going back to the title of this, yeah. Based off of the news that we have been seeing, we are going to have a President Trump. Now, I know for a lot of you, this is going to be a very frightening thing. I want to assure you of at least one thing. The havoc that a President Trump will wreak is actually very manageable. It's not going to be so out of control like how it was under the Bush years. The reason I'm saying this is that, look, think about what you're hearing from the leadership of the congressional Republicans, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. What have they been saying? They have been actually saying things that have to try to distance themselves from what Donald Trump has been, spouting out about, I don't know, God knows what. So let me say this. Trump will be lucky if Congress even passes about 5 to 10% of what he campaigned on. A lot of what he's saying, about building a wall, blah, 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 conducting all this or whatever. A lot of that requires the cooperation of Congress. And quite frankly, I don't think he's going to have that kind of leverage. Most of the people don't exactly want what he's campaigned on, but they're willing to stomach it if it means keeping a potential national security liability out of office. Anyhow, this is something that we need to think about. The Supreme Court, I don't think he's going to appoint somebody who's quite to the level of what Robert Bork was back in the 1980s. I don't think he'll do that. And I don't think that'll happen for one reason. The Republicans, I don't think, are going to have the numbers necessary in the Senate to block a Democratic filibuster for a Supreme Court justice that is way too far on another planet. That's one thing. You can be assured of that. Now, the whole thing about him, praising Putin, being, this Benedict Arnold and such. First of all, take a step back and actually read between the lines. What is he actually saying? I know what Trump is saying. Trump is saying that, like it or not, we need to work with Vladimir Putin. Now, he may be really great at keeping his country stable, and he should deserve a lot of credit for that. But he also said, I don't approve, by the way, that he's doing it, but the fact that he has a stable country and the fact that he's willing to fight for his own convictions and for what's best for the Russian people is very admirable. And we need a leader like that. And actually, Trump is surprisingly not wrong in saying that. He's absolutely right. And he's also correct in not listening to the neocons who don't know jack about how to have manageable relations with the Russians, aka the biggest nuclear weapons stockpile in the entire world. This is a massive reason not to actually not elect Hillary Clinton, because she will mean the unleashing of that kind of awesome power. So I don't think Trump will be quite as reckless as the Clinton campaign is actually making him out to be. The other thing you also got to keep in mind is that even though Donald Trump is a loudmouth, there's some things that he's actually not wrong about. The whole thing, like, for example, that we got to, with him saying, well, with Crimea, I mean, we should just recognize it as a part of Russia. He's actually, historically, he's absolutely right. I don't mean to say this to anybody who's in, like, Ukraine and such, who thinks the absolute opposite of what Trump says. Now, there are a lot of Ukrainian nationalists that are highly opposed to him and would prefer Hillary Clinton. I understand that. But I'm talking about from the historic perspective is that Crimea was only tossed into Ukraine in 1954 by the then leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. Prior to 1954, it was part of the Russian Republic. And so what he's saying about that is actually, that's historically factual. Now, about, now the whole hullabaloo, especially like what, about him backing up and letting Russia basically take over Ukraine, Georgia, and all those ex-Soviet states. Take a step back for a minute. Vladimir Putin has said that the greatest geopolitical disaster for the Russians as a people was the collapse of the Soviet Union. In some cases, he's actually right. But in other cases, not that much. In certain cases, yeah, he's absolutely correct. I'm talking states like, Belarus, Ukraine, the Caucasus states, and many of the Central Asian republics that used to, used to make up the Soviet Union, along with possibly, quasi Moldova. Baltic states, not so much. They were actually somewhat stable before World War II actually happened, before they were forcibly annexed by the Soviet Union. Now, will Vladimir Putin direct the Russian intel, all them to start a campaign of essentially trying to get the ex-republics, the ex-Soviet republics that are a part of NATO out of it? Yeah. But that's expected. Think about it through the Russians' eyes for a second. Don't think about it from the gung-ho Americans, America. No, think about it from the other side. I'm going to quote a actually very smart man on this subject, Pat Buchanan. It's basically, the whole thing with NATO is like taking is marching an army up to basically your front porch and your back doorstep. That's what NATO is to the Russians. So it's like, why are they doing this? And at whom is this alliance aimed against? Quite clearly, it's the Russians. Which is why they're trying to tell us to basically back up here. We don't want more NATO expansion beyond what it already is. The Russians see that as a massive, massive threat. So what they hear from Donald Trump is saying that, look, maybe we should be taking another look at this. They actually think what's going on in their minds is that, hey, this guy is actually talking sense. So that's part of it. Now, whether or not Vladimir Putin is the monster that everybody makes him out to be, I think it's a lot more complex than that. I'm not going to come out and say out and out that Putin is completely and totally is this complete monster who needs to be snuffed out at the very earliest opportunity. Vladimir Putin right now, even if he's acting as a strongman, his power in Russia is actually beginning to weaken. And so it's not really all that predictable as to what is going to happen. Not while he's in there. While he's in there, it's going to be somewhat stable. But if he's not in there, and I'm talking about should he, for example, pass away while still in office, quote unquote, then there's going to be a problem, because then there's going to be a massive leadership vacuum. And that's going to be a lot more dangerous. Potentially a lot more dangerous, because the Russians are going to be basically in chaos. So you got to bear that in mind. Now, with the whole thing about, like, with Ukraine and, in some of the Caucasus states, think about this. Many of those places, I think with the possible exceptions of, well, specifically Georgia and Ukraine, those two are absolutely failed states. Ukraine in particular actually is the worst out of all of them. Ukraine has not been able to get its internal affairs in order since actually before the Orange Revolution of 2004. So the Russians' point is that since our brothers and sisters in Ukraine cannot get their affairs in order, we basically now have no choice but to actually manage their affairs for them. That's the point that it's getting up to, and that is why if Russia invades Ukraine, that will be the rationale. That is why having somebody like Hillary Clinton in the presidency is actually a lot more dangerous. Now, can we work with Putin to try to help Ukraine get back on track? Absolutely. That's totally doable. If the Ukrainians request us to work to help, if they request our help with bringing, if they need us to sort of help them work with the Russians in this sense, we should be happy to do it. And that is essentially what Trump is saying. Now, apart in the sense of NATO and a lot of these other major non-NATO allies, Trump is actually right. And the people that are advising Hillary Clinton are totally living on another planet. Which is why you should be understanding what Trump's saying. Trump is basically making the point and saying that we cannot afford to keep subsidizing the world's military budget and basically fighting the world's battles for it. He is correct in saying that. There's a lot of people right now, and he's basically voicing the what I think is actually the top concern of everybody, which is getting out of actually fighting more counterinsurgency wars. So that is another thing that he's actually right in saying, is that we need to quit doing this. It's bankrupting us, and we're basically becoming the world's laughing stock because we can't get our affairs in order from everybody else basically getting in here. Now, on the domestic front, everybody is very correct in being very wary of what Trump is proposing to do, at least in the domestic area, at least in the realm of domestic policy. But as I said before, about 90 to 95% of it is going to require cooperation with Congress. And also, if it's going to get implemented, it also needs the cooperation of all the states, actually, and even the District of Columbia, and all the other local municipalities, if they wanted to try to do it that way. Bottom line is that if Trump can not get cooperation either from Congress or the states, which I don't think he'll have an easy time doing, especially his first 2 years in office when we have united government under the Republicans. I don't think he's going to have such an easy time of it. Not to the extent that he's making a bravado over. So we got that to think about. Now, could he potentially go around and try to incite, racial violence and such? Yeah, and that's, or any other kind of or violence, not just based on race, but also on other factors? Absolutely. And we should continue to hold him in check because of that. Or if he's proposing things to basically bring back Jim Crow, or for that matter, to bring back slavery to, quote unquote, to basically bring back slavery to make, blacks, bring the blacks into slavery again. Yeah, that is something we should fight on all fronts. And we should also keep fighting to make sure that we can get the best thing possible. Now, given what's been going on with Obamacare and how it's been somewhat of a failure, actually, this isn't to say that we need to go back to the system that we had previously, because that system basically was basically wealth care, had nothing to do with good health. What we're going to have to push for, and if we need to push President Trump to do it, then we'll do it with the President Trump. If not, we'll do it with whomever the Democrat is that will most likely succeed him when he's most likely going to be thrown out of office 4 years from now. So that's the point I'm making. Now, all the thing of taking away all the civil rights legislation, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Look, he may try to do that, but a lot of that, but that will basically spark a reaction when the midterm of 2018 actually comes. And that's going to be an anti-Republican wave. So what I'm saying is that, yeah, he'll try to get that enacted, and he'll have a hard time through Congress doing it. And we need to keep fighting to make sure Congress knows that we do not want this kind of legislation passed. So that's what we're going to need to do. We're going to need to organize at the grassroots. Now, that's only part of it. That's only the first half of it. The other half of it is actually that, listen, so that Trump does not have just to make sure that Trump and the Republicans don't have such an easy time engaging, implementing their regressive platform. We need to be focusing more on the down ballot races. Don't worry about the top of the ticket. The top of the ticket is more or less decided. It's going to be Donald Trump. It's going to be basically a factor of how big of a margin. Now, the size of that margin is going to depend on what else Julian Assange will release through WikiLeaks. Keep that in mind. That is what it's going to depend on. And I'm thinking that the more stuff that he releases, I would say by possibly early October, barring he says something that's totally off the wall at the first presidential debate that's going to be happening in about 3 weeks. Basically, Julian Assange has got stuff that he said is basically a lot worse and is going to have a much bigger impact on Hillary and the Democrats than he will actually think. That's going to be it's going to have a much bigger impact than the previous stuff. So be ready for that. So, but what I'm saying is that in the Democrats that are basically running for Congress or such, especially if but especially those that are coming in to replace either outgoing incumbents or incumbents that they defeated in primaries, focus on backing them up, focus on making sure that we can expand progressive ranks, especially within the 45 state legislatures that come up for a vote. Look into all the governorships that come up for a vote. Look into all the others that are happening. So anyway, yeah, and we also need to make sure that we make our voices known that we are not going to tolerate the Trans-Pacific Partnership or its would-be cousin with the European Union, which luckily went nowhere because they couldn't come up with the right kind of language in order to make it actually somewhat feasible. So that's good. That's good news. If we can pull that off with the TPP, we're in business. And that's exactly what we're going to need to try to do. And we're going to also have to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where nothing gets done. I mean, we're still going to have to fight no matter what. Whether it was Hillary, but then again, we would have been having a much harder time reining her in or holding her accountable because the Republicans are not going to let us try to hold her accountable because they'll try to do it in a way where it will not only try to impeach, not only try to placate some of the radicals that are within their ranks, specifically from the House Freedom Caucus. I'm talking about. I'm just talking about if it that unless they really have to, they're not going to try to bring impeachment charges. But if they do, it's not just going to be against Hillary. I know many people are going to think I'm crazy for saying this, but they'll go most likely also after Tim Kaine. Even if he becomes vice president, they'll go after him too. They're just going to go after him because under the quote unquote standard of being guilty by association, even if he's not personally connected to it. The problem is that if he was with Hillary Clinton, they're going to say that, oh, well, he's tied to it, so we need to get rid of him too. And that's going to mean an unelected president gets sworn in, which will essentially be Paul Ryan. But Paul Ryan, I can assure you, unless he's literally forced to do it based on whatever evidence comes through from Hillary's you know Hillary's poor judgment in terms of and poor handling of classified information and state secrets. Depending on what happens, he's not going to go through with an impeachment until he has basically a solid enough case to do so. He's not going to repeat the same mistake that Newt Gingrich made back in 1998. He's not going to repeat that same mistake. If he's going to do it, he's going to do it based on the facts involved, which is essentially what the Democrats did back during the Nixon, back with Nixon when Watergate broke. And that's what both parties are going to do. They'll basically go with wherever the facts take them at this point. Partisan ideologies aside, the fact of the matter is the people of this country have been lied to for the past, I would say, almost 4 or 5 decades actually. We've not had an honest president. Oh no, actually, scratch that. With the exception of Jimmy Carter and a little bit with Gerald Ford, but mostly with Jimmy Carter, actually, we have not had an honest president. Someone who actually isn't corrupt in the presidency. Up until basically between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama, we had not had an honest man. We haven't had an honest person in the presidency. Well, I'm not saying that he's been totally honest himself, President Obama, but whatever. The fact is that he had basically said that we need to quit doing stupid shit, and he's right. And that's essentially what Donald Trump is saying that we need to do, is that we're basically acting like clowns in that we can essentially call Congress clowngress. And because of that, we need to basically quit fooling around and actually get something done. Now, this whole thing with political correctness and such, look, I would agree 100% with anybody who does not want to hear, racial epithets or racial slurs or any other kinds of, bigoted speech. I don't care for that myself. And I hear you, and I agree with you 100% that should never become mainstream again. However, we also need to understand that there are a lot of people that are furious about all of the changes that had taken place since 1964. There's a lot of people that are absolutely furious about it. Now, are a lot of these people, now, do a lot of these happen to be basically, are many of them white supremacists and such? Yeah, some of them are. Some of them are, the quote unquote racial conservatives, which, again, they're primarily but not exclusively from the South. But that's the thing you gotta. But that's the thing. But that's what you're dealing with that, and they feel like they've been ignored. But there's other things that we also need to kind of address that have not been addressed either. Like, take for example that there's a demographic that is dying, and we need to do something to help prop them up. It's the white working class males. White working class men are dying, literally dying. And no, it is not from, you know, being shot down, all this, or through murder or something. No. 95% of that is actually suicide. So that's an epidemic that we do need to address. There's there's other epidemics that are also going on. And the fact is that we need also someone in Washington who can at least who at least has been talking with everyone, maybe not in the, let's just say, not in the cleanest terms, but or in the cleanest way that could be what we basically call the educated way, actually. But that's the thing, is that people right now don't, people right now are basically saying, look, yeah, we agree with you on terms of actually bringing more equality under the law. That the Democrats are absolutely right about. But the way they've been doing it, and this is the Republicans' point, or actually the South's point for that matter, much of the South actually, is that they've been doing it in the most divisive way possible. Now, whether or not there's truth to that is purely on by individual judgment. There may be a little bit of historic truth to that, but there's not that much. The fact is that the Republicans, by courting the South, they too. But the biggest problem is that not everywhere in the South, but that region has a history of dividing this country in two. Oh, or let me put it to you this way: there's always been that north-south tension. It's been there from basically the beginning of this since we became a country. That's always been there. So a lot of this is, basically white rage against this imposed form of equality. A lot of it is actually not justified, but some of it is, but not all of it. But a very tiny percentage of it actually is actually somewhat legit. The overwhelming majority actually isn't, which is basically saying that we need to go back to Jim Crow, basically because none of these other, none of these other ethnic groups, you know, sh- basically should be even entitled to anything at all, or for that matter, much of their philosophy says is that the only people that should be benefiting from reaping society's rewards is white people, and that everybody else is basically there to serve white people. And that's what a lot of them actually want to bring back. And that's something that we're going to have to fight to keep from happening. And as I said before, we need to organize, and we need to keep our attention at the down ballot to make sure that they that the down ballot races are not stacked with a lot of Trump acolytes. More people that will be a part of not to grow the membership of the House Freedom Caucus. That's the caucus we're going to need to neutralize. And Trump is actually providing us with our earliest opportunity to do so. Hillary Clinton is, besides being a walking liability, she's also someone who is literally waiting to be shot down at some point or another. She has basically no credibility, and I would say by the beginning of October, it's done. She will not. She'll be at a point where it's basically the point of no return. She's going to be behind Trump, and that margin, I would say starting in about early October, is going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So actually, I don't think this is going to be quite as close a race as everybody in the media is going to make it out to be. This may actually be a Trump landslide, and I can see this happening very easily. Now, I know all of you are going to be scared or going to be saying, like, oh shit, we got to keep him from getting that odds, blah, blah, blah. No. Let him, let him take the landslide. We have other means of basically reining him in. So this way he understands that even if he gets in, even if he's elected into office, he comes into office via a landslide election, he'll know pretty quickly, he'll learn pretty quickly that we are going to hold him accountable. And it's going to be a lot simpler holding him accountable rather than holding Hillary accountable. Hillary is only accountable to the donors who basically contribute very handsomely to her campaign and also to her and also to all of her super PACs. Trump is actually beholden to no one. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, because he's like that, then he's going to be a loose cannon. Actually, he's gotten people right now that have successfully got reined him in, have somewhat reined him in. The Republicans were able to luckily get through to him that what he's doing is he's basically killing his opportunity to do it. He's like, huh, okay. So they managed to rein him in. And they'll be doing everything they can to make sure that they can keep him reined in and not do something that's going to basically kill their electoral chances. Anyway, this has been going on for about over 40 minutes, actually, so